Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode. And today we're going to have a look at this camera. This is the clockwork camera that went into space. Well, sort of. It's the Leningrad rangefinder, the rangefinder camera that I bought at the London Photographica Camera Fair a few weeks ago. And I have to ask, after using this camera for a little while, I have to ask the question, is there a more complex way to shoot L39 mount lenses? Because if there is, I really can't think of it. We're also going to be having a look at this little product. This is a power solution for digital camera batteries. That's the NP-BX1 battery, so Sony RX100 cameras, that's the high-end point and shoots. The Sony ZV1 cameras, that's the vlogging camera. So this is a little charging case for those batteries, and we're going to be having a look at that later on. But first we'll look at the Leningrad. Now, there were lots and lots of Soviet rangefinders over the years, and they were all based on the original Leica 2 of 1932, and they produced an exact copy of that camera, and this is one of those copies. This is the Zorki one. There was also a Fed one, but you know, if you know the Leica 2 cameras, you'll see that this is pretty much an exact copy of that original Leica 2 of 1932, and all the subsequent Soviet rangefinders were developments of that original camera. So we've got the Zorki 4, the Zorki 3, the Fed cameras, the Fed 4, the Fed 2, the Fed 3, all of them are developments of this original Leica 2 design of 1932, and that goes for this Leningrad as well. Within there, although it's a rather different machine from the rest of the Soviet rangefinders, within here somewhere is the Leica type cloth shutter and various other Leica type bits to make it work. But this is the most complex Soviet rangefinder. They tend to be pretty simple devices, they're not complex. This one is. Now, I said it's the camera that went into space, and it is, but I have to qualify that with the words kind of. Versions of this camera were sent into space with the Soviet space missions of the late 60s and the 70s. There were two versions of this camera went into space. One was a heavily modified mechanical version, which was, you know, vaguely similar to this one, had much of the internal workings of this one. And one was a very much more heavily modified electronic version, which I think retained the basic mechanical works, you know, the shutter and so on, but added some electronics for greater precision. So this one isn't really a space camera, although I guess it could work nicely enough in space, but it was really, I think, aimed at the professional market, mostly for internal consumption, I would think. So for the kind of photographer who, you know, they're shooting all the time, there might be a photojournalist, you know, they might work for a newspaper, or you know, any other sphere where a photographer is using their camera pretty much all the time, day in, day out, then I guess this was a solution to fill that need. Now, this camera has intrigued me for many years. I do have an interest in Soviet rangefinders because my first camera was a Soviet rangefinder. It was a Fed 4, and I learned photography on that camera, and I just shot the flipping heck out of it for about 10 years. I had one camera and one lens. So I do have an interest in Soviet rangefinders, and this one intrigued me over the years. The difference between this and other Soviet rangefinders, or the main difference, is it has a clockwork motor. It's a power wind camera, and it's powered by clockwork. So you wind it up on the top here, you turn it anti-clockwise to wind, which is unusual, and the clockwork mechanism winds the camera. So as I'm going to push the shutter button, so when I push the shutter button there will be a complete operation of the shutter. So it will open and it will close, and then when I take my finger off it you'll hear another clunk, and that's the clockwork motor winding on that shutter and powering it up, ready for the next shot, and winding the film on as well. So this is a power wind camera. So I'll just demonstrate. So that's the shot taken, and that's wind on, and you can do that as much as you like. You know, if you've got a quick trigger finger, you can probably get 3 frames per second out of this camera, and you know, it's a good solution. The batteries of the time were not powerful enough, they weren't small enough. It would have to have had, you know, to do this job, to wind this camera effectively, it would have had to have a very large battery for the time. You know, the smaller batteries just didn't have the capacity. So a clockwork motor was a good solution at the time. It's a mechanical tour de force, and it really is, but honestly, I can't help wondering exactly what the point is. It's a bit of an anachronism. It's a beautiful anachronism, but I think it is a bit of an anachronism. And I don't know even at the time how many of these they would have sold, how many Soviet sports reporters thought, yeah, I really need a Leningrad. I honestly don't know. As you will have noticed, I'll show you more closely in a moment the camera, but as you will have noticed, it does have a very loud shutter sound, and in fact it's the loudest I've heard from, I think, any Soviet camera, maybe even any camera. It's a very, very loud sound. So this is not a discrete camera, and I can't help wondering if an SLR would have been the better camera to use to you know, to do this sort of modification on and to take in this direction. Maybe an SLR would have been better, I don't know. Rangefinders were a big deal at the time, a lot of professionals used them, so I suppose I can understand it in that regard. It really is big and it really is heavy. If we compare it to the Zorki 4, which is the next biggest camera, it's not any wider, and it's only a little bit taller, but it does feel very big. It's got quite a large looking shape, and it's certainly a heavy camera, and it's a beautiful, in a terrifying way, example of the industrial design of the time. It really does have a beauty in that respect, but I have to say it's an ungainly beast. Okay, so there's our Leningrad in all its mechanical beauty, and it really is a beautiful thing, although I don't find the style itself particularly pleasing. It's not a style that I like, this very sort of angular 50s styling. It does have a mechanical beauty. Let's turn it around and show you the back. So we've got an adjusting diopter mechanism there. Here's the top plate. Is that the best way to turn it? No, there's the top plate. So we've got the wind knob here, the shutter release, film counter, shutter speed setting, which you can set on this camera before you've taken a shot because it's already wound. Most Soviet cameras you can't. This is the rewind knob over here. It's a good camera to hold because it has this grip built into it. I don't know if you can see, there's an angled grip there, and it really is very good, very easy to hold and to keep in your hand. So it's very user friendly in that sense. It has this very handy fold out foot, which a lot of the 1950s Soviet cameras did, but was dropped, I think, throughout the 60s. But that's a really handy thing because it's front heavy, and when you put it down, that means it'll stand up. So let's remove the back and show you the inside. So there's underneath, and it's got one of these usual hooks that most of these Soviet rangefinders have. Most have two, one on either side. This one's got one just on this side, and then you unscrew this big knob here, and as you do that, as you unscrew that, it forces the back down and the whole back comes off to reveal our standard Leica type cloth shutter. Let me fire the camera. It's on a fast speed. Let's put it on a slower speed so you can see it more clearly. So let's fire that shutter now. And there we are. We've now come to the end of the clockwork motor's energy. So you can see the shutter hasn't quite recocked. So let's give it a bit more juice. And go again. Now the shutter has recocked itself. So we take the shot, and when you take your finger off the button, then the clockwork motor in here, or in here, wherever it is, winds on the film and recocks the shutter. Let's put the back on now. So it's a beautiful machine with an ultra-modern 1950s look. This thing would have looked really modern in the late 50s when it was released. It will have looked as though it was absolutely the latest tech, which it kind of both was and wasn't, but it is a beautiful piece of industrial design that perfectly encapsulates its time. Now this camera has the best rangefinder of any camera that I've used. That's all of the Soviet rangefinders and my Barnack Leicas. I'm not sure what the rangefinders are like on the M cameras, the Leica M cameras. I've never used one of those, but all the rangefinders I've used, this one has the best optical rangefinder to actually look through in the viewfinder. Before we do that though, are you a user of a Sony RX series or a Sony ZV1 camera? Well, if so, this product could well be perfect for you. This is the ZG Cine portable charging case for NP-BX1 batteries. That's batteries for the Sony RX100 and the Sony ZV1 cameras. This is a portable charging case, and your batteries pop right into it and they'll charge while you're on the move. So it's a really handy solution, a high capacity charging case for two batteries with a capacity of 19.25 watts per hour. So it's got a pretty good capacity. I think this is a better solution than a power bank because there's no need to bring a charger with you. You know, if you took a power bank, you'd have to connect your charger to that and charge your batteries from that. Well, this is an all-in-one solution. There's no need to bring a charger with you, and you can be sure of always having charged batteries with you. So let's take a closer look at this little product. So there is the charging case, and there's a switch on the front here. We press it once to switch it on and twice to switch it off. So that's what actually begins the charging process. Very simple slots for two batteries, 1 and 2. Here's the main power source housed within the charging case. That's the power source is in there that actually charges your batteries. It takes a USB-C charging cable with connects to the USB port on the back here, and that port also acts as an output, so you can carry this in place of a power bank. It will also work as power bank as well, and it's got some rubber feet on the bottom, thoughtfully included, so this device won't scratch any table or a polished surface that you put it on top of. So this really is a great solution for all users of RX 100 cameras and ZV1 cameras. But now back to the Leningrad. So the rangefinder, as I was saying, on this camera is the best I've used on any rangefinder camera, at least for clarity. Most rangefinder patches that you see through the viewfinder, if you're not sure, a rangefinder has a double image, a little patch within the viewfinder that when you turn the focus ring of the lens, you see a double image and it will move side to side, and when you get those two images to coincide just perfectly, then you're perfectly in focus. So this is a very, very clear rangefinder. Usually they're a little bit fuzzy, the patch is a little bit dim, certainly on these older cameras, the kind of rangefinders that I use. And even when my Fed 4 was brand new in 1978, it always had a rangefinder patch that was a little bit dim. This one is different. It's very, very sharp, very, very clear, and it's a joy to use. It's no more accurate than the other rangefinders that I've used, but it is very easy to see, so that's nice, but it's not perfect. It works best with straight vertical lines, and if you don't have any of those lines in your shot, then it can be tricky to focus. Several reviewers back in the day mentioned this. I've heard several recent reviewers mention this, and indeed I've found it to be true as well. Very tricky to focus this camera if there aren't any clear vertical lines in the shot. If there are, perfect. Very, very simple, very, very easy to use. But if there are not, then you might struggle. So a little more difficult to use than the other rangefinders in that area. Now, parallax correction is an important thing in rangefinder cameras. What happens when you use a rangefinder camera, because the window that you look through, that is this one, and the lens, that is what the camera looks through, are in different places, there's a difference in where they're positioned, the closer you go to your subject, the more likely it is you're not going to get accurate framing, you're not going to see what the lens sees. So really fancy rangefinder cameras have a thing called parallax correction, where the actual view will move up and down in the viewfinder and adjust for distance. And in fact, the Yashica 35 GT that I used recently, I reviewed recently, has horizontal or vertical parallax correction. Well, none of the Russian rangefinders I've used, the Soviet rangefinders rather, that I've used, have parallax correction apart from this one, but this one has it horizontally only, and I'm not quite sure what the thinking is there. It's far more important for me anyway. Vertical correction is far more important. This one has horizontal correction. It may be that this one has a fault and it should have vertical correction as well, but it doesn't. So I'm going to assume it doesn't have a fault, and if that's the case, then I'm not sure what value horizontal correction gives over vertical correction. So that's a bit odd. Maybe you know, please let me know if you know. The other thing about this viewfinder, the other great thing actually about this viewfinder, is that it has frame lines built in. So it's got frame lines for, I'm pretty sure it's 35, 50 and 135, but let me just check. Oh yeah, it's got frame lines for 50, 85 and 135. 35 also, yes, so 35, 50, 85 and 135 frame line. That's really useful, because usually you have to put, with these Soviet rangefinders, you have to put an extra viewfinder on the top there if you're using a different focal length other than a 50mm lens. These are all up 50mm lens viewfinders only. This one has it built in the viewfinder. That's a great thing, and they're very, very easy, very, very clear to see, and it's the only Russian, Soviet rather, rangefinder that I know of, apart from the Fed 5, that has those frame lines built in, so a very, very useful feature. In use, well, it's much like any other manual rangefinder camera in that it's fairly slow to use. You've got to measure the light, you've got to enter the settings on your camera, you've got to frame and compose, and then you've got to focus. The actual power wind bit is only useful for shooting several shots of a shot that you've already set up, you've already put the information into. So like the most other manual rangefinders, this is a fairly slow camera to use. It works really well. I've not had any faults or problems with this camera, which is something of a miracle. I was keeping my fingers crossed all the time I was using it, because it is a complex mechanical device, but I've not had any problems with it, aside from it being rather heavy and big. I did feel the weight of this camera, and I did feel a bit conspicuous using it as well, in a way that I wouldn't feel using the Zorki 3 or the Zorki 4 or the Fed 4. I don't feel conspicuous at all with those cameras, but with this one I did. I must admit the size and weight grated a bit as well. Did I like it? In many ways this is a beautiful machine, but I don't know. This is a subjective thing, I have to admit. On the whole, I didn't like this as much as the other Soviet rangefinders I've used. It's rather too big and too heavy. It's rather too complex for my needs, and I just wouldn't shoot an old film rangefinder in the way that this is designed to be shot, i.e. for taking several shots rapidly, one after the other. If I want to do multiple shots like that, I'll use digital. I don't think this is the best solution for that kind of photography. The Zorki 3 here is far more usable and much nicer looking. Just look at the difference in appearance between those two cameras. This Zorki 3 is, in my opinion, a genuinely beautiful thing, a really fantastic piece of industrial design, whereas this one just looks ungainly. It's as though someone said, well, all right, we've got this big monstrosity of a camera, let's put a few modern lines on it to make it look fancy and snazzy and appealing. But certainly the Zorki 3 is far more usable, as is the Zorki 4, the Zorki 1, the Fed 4, the Fed 2, the Fed 3, all the other Soviet rangefinders, and in fact most other rangefinders, are much lighter, much smaller and much quieter. And I don't know where I'd get it fixed if it broke, because, you know, eventually it would, because it's a machine. Should you buy one? Well, there are other far better, more usable Soviet rangefinder cameras around. In fact, I would venture to say most of them fit the needs of today's rangefinder photographers. Anybody who'd buy an old Soviet rangefinder today, or an old manual rangefinder today, wouldn't really need this camera. So, you know, the others are much smaller, much smaller. I just said that twice, didn't I? Should you buy one? Well, there are other far better, more usable Soviet rangefinders available. The Zorki 4 over here, the Zorki 1, the Fed 4, 2 and 3. They're all far better value, and for my needs they're better cameras too. So unless you really want one, there are far better and cheaper cameras out there. This is a fascinating machine, there's no doubt about it, and it's an extraordinary piece of industrial design, but for me it's just too complex. So I guess that's it from me for today. I do hope you've enjoyed this look at this extraordinary old machine. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell thing before you go. Many thanks to all the subscribers who subscribed and stayed with us. Thanks for building up the support. If you like the channel, if you like the episode, please give us a sub. I would like to build those subscriber numbers up. We're very nearly at 30,000. Let's see if we can hit that. Thanks to all the patrons who continue to support the channel. Patrons are absolutely vital to what this channel does. This channel could not bring you the kind of stuff that it does without the support of patrons. So many thanks to the continued support of patrons. And if you like the content on this channel, you might consider becoming a patron yourself. You can do that over at patreon.com/sonography, and you can do it for as little as $1 per month. As ever, many thanks for tuning in and watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.